Hello, y'all, and welcome to Untied We Stand. This is Kevin Putz here. I've got something to say about gun violence and police violence in the United States these days. Now, this video is not scripted, so I'm just going off the cuff here because I'm angry. I'm angry for a number of reasons. I'm going to start off with the general public and this rash of mass shootings that we have that is ever increasing, and the Second Amendment crowd that seems to think this is okay. Just to be clear up front, y'all motherfuckers that think it's okay to go shoot up a mall because of some dusty old tome that says you have the individual right to bear arms, even though this is actually a pretty modern interpretation after Heller, you're wrong. It's not okay. And even if it was legal, and that the legal intent was not well known like it actually is, then still, if something in our law is a suicide pact, then we have to change the law. No, this does not mean I'm a fan of banning weapons. At least not altogether. Highly restricting? Absolutely. So let's look at it for a second here. The Second Amendment does not say you have the right to shoot up a Walmart. The Second Amendment does not say that you can own any old weapon of war and go out and use it on your fellow citizens. It doesn't even imply it. The very first words of it, the ones that you 2A fanatics seem to not understand or even acknowledge exist, it's the opening sentence. A well-regulated militia. We need that if we're to have arms. Now, the understanding of it at the time it was written, and I'm throwing this out here because you've got some of you originalists. Having read a lot of the opinions of the so-called originalists, I am surprised that any of them are aware that anything happened more than yesterday, but we'll let that pass for now. What was the original intent of the Second Amendment? And here, my fellow lefties, you have to give it to them. It was indeed to have people ready to be soldiers at a moment's notice. It was about military weapons. And your argument that we should now require them to have muskets doesn't really work out either. That being said, the militias of the time were regulated by the individual states. It's even in our Constitution, the governors of the individual states are to assign the officers to the militia. Or appoint them, rather, not assign. At the time of the founding, at the time that the Constitution was written, in addition to having just fought a civil war against England, which we won, often with the use of militia, the Founding Fathers very much wanted the general populace to be ready to go. Most of the states had this formally enacted in their law. Virginia militiamen were called Minutemen, which is where we get the term from, because they were expected to be ready to go on the summons within 1 minute. They were to maintain a certain amount of powder and balls, and I believe 2 muskets. I can't remember for certain on this, and I don't have it right in front of me. But in any case, they maintained weapons and ammunition at all times. But they also regularly trained. These men were not regular army. They were not as skilled as a soldier. But they were close. They had the equivalent of basic training. They met regularly to practice their skills, both with weapons and with tactics. They had officers assigned by the state and sub-officers assigned by those officers, right down to the city level, to where each group, what we would call a platoon now, had its own officer, and they met regularly to practice their skills. They were not some yahoo that just turned 18 and decided they needed to shoot up a school. And it was required. It wasn't optional. If you were a male citizen of at least 12 of the 13 colonies, I'm not certain of Pennsylvania, I think they had militia rules as well, but of the other 12, I'm certain of it. It was your duty to participate in the militia. The exception being if you were in the regular army. Now, modern states, the constitutions vary quite a bit on that. where I live now in Idaho, the militia is defined and the rules are very similar. It's not enforced because times have changed and most people don't participate, and we have too many people that just wouldn't do it. I think that's outrageous, but let's talk about that a little bit. If we did things similar to the way the Swiss do, I think we would see the violence drop a great deal because we wouldn't have these yahoos that just want to shoot. They would have experience. They would have served in the military for 2 years. And then they would be required to maintain their weapons until such time as they were no longer eligible to be in the militia. And then they optionally could continue to do so. That's the way it's done in Switzerland, and that's the way it's been done in Switzerland for centuries. The Swiss are not killing each other. Yes, they have murders, every country does. They have accidents with guns too, at a higher rate than most places because they have a lot of guns, but not that bad. By comparison, it's nothing. We have people dying from gunfire all over the country every single day. It's ridiculous. We have to fix it. Now moving on to the other armed thugs, the police. There was this movement, and it's still there, but it's not getting the media attention, called defund the police. Now, a lot of people, so-called moderates, which in a country that's falling apart at the seams, being a moderate means you're a coward. Yeah, I said it. Nevertheless, the so-called moderates were saying, well, we didn't really mean that. What we meant was, all of these things to reform. They're like, well, guess what? I meant it. I meant defund. I meant abolish. I meant destroy these idiots. Get them off the street, disarm them, and start the fuck over. Yes, we need guardians of the peace. Yes, we need people to maintain the traffic and, help to maintain an orderly society. The very meaning of the word police, to make orderly. What we don't need is people that are lighting up the citizens just because they can. I, as an independent citizen, am held to a much higher standard for the use of violence than a policeman is. This is bullshit. The policemen have license to be violent and therefore should be held to a much higher standard. If a cop kills somebody, that cop should, without fail, stand trial for murder. If the shooting was justified and falls under the rubric of what they needed to do to protect the public and themselves, then cool. They will prevail. If, on the other hand, they decided that driving while black or driving while Cherokee, in my case, is somehow a crime, well, San Quentin ain't a real nice place, but it's where they belong. There's this modern acronym, ACAB. All cops are bastards. It's a fact. All cops are bastards, even the ones I like. Even the so-called good apples. Because the saying, despite what the police unions would have you believe, isn't a few good or a few bad apples or a few bad apples. It goes like this. One bad apple spoils the barrel. And they are doing nothing to remove the bad apples. What has changed in my 54 years is the wide availability of cameras. The cops are not more violent. They've always been like this. What's different is now we're getting them on video and they can't lie. So we get judges suppressing it, or we have the internal investigation. Yes, let's please set the fox to guard the hen house. That's going to be real good for the hens. Think it through, people. There is no circumstance where somebody who has a license to be violent can be judged by their own. That is simply wrong. If the police are not willing to be accountable themselves, which they have proven they are not, then they need to be held to a ridiculously difficult standard of approval and behavior. And they need to be held to that standard by us and by the courts. How exactly you would do that would be variable, but it's not that difficult. 1. Civilian oversight. 2. body cameras that the cops cannot turn off. They must be charged, and they are controlled from remote by someone who is not part of the police department. That's where you start. Then, in the case where the police employ violence, those police are immediately removed from the force after the incident and stand trial. This is not egregious. Yes, it will discourage and cause a mass defection of a lot of the current police department. Anybody who thinks that's a bad thing is not paying attention. Yeah, and that's when I'm talking to you in your nice, pretty, gated communities. You are the people that they protect. The other 90% of us are their targets. I should not be afraid to see a policeman when I'm walking down the road, but I am. I can only imagine what it's like for my black brothers. I have this basic color of skin in the winter. I can pass for white. I get some sun on me, the Cherokee comes right through. And you know what? When I'm walking in the summer, I get a lot more harassment. It's toned down some as I've gotten older, because that's the other thing they love to do, is harass young people of color. They see a gray beard and they're a little less likely to do it, but it still happens frequently. Walking down the street is not a crime. Being poor is not a crime. Living outside of a gated community is not a crime. And having melanin in your skin is not a crime. Melanin deficiency seems to have some mental aberrations with it, but that's a whole nother story. Our police are out of control, and therefore criminal, and therefore should be defunded and abolished. And no, I'm not going to walk it back.